Country Life on Midlands 103. Brought to you by W. Shaw Burlington Business Park Tullamore. Supplier of New Holland's tractors in the Midlands. WRShaw.ie.
Now, good evening and welcome to Country Life here on Midlands 103. It is Wednesday, 8th of April 2026. MJ Clery with you until 8 p.m. this evening, bringing you all the news from the worlds of farming, food and agri-business. Thank you all for joining me this evening, as always. And in a moment, Philip O'Connor from IFAC joins me to speak about the surge in fuel costs, which is seeing protests all over the country over the last couple of days. And what action can you take as a farmer in relation to this? That in just a moment. Also this evening, TAMS grants on shed. So how many times have you heard somebody say the following: I'm not getting the grant, it's cheaper to build without it? Martin Merrick, County Mayo man from the Irish Farmers Journal, is going to put that statement to bed once and for all. Is it true? Is it false? We're going to hear a little bit later. And also, if you're planning on any building around your yard, do you need planning permission? Well, it depends on a number of factors, and Martin is going to go through those as well. An organic farm walk takes place next Tuesday in Enfield. It's all about growing quality silage without the use of fertiliser, something that is very apt even for non-organic farmers given the current price escalation. Marianne Mulhall from County Laois has more on that a little bit later. And finally this evening, the question of whether or not you have a teleporter on your farm comes to hand. If the answer is yes, then Tullamore man Pat O'Brien from the ICMSA has very important information for you regarding a training course which operators need to attend depending on what items you are lifting. Yeah, it's quite technical, this one. And if you have a teleporter in your yard, please stay tuned for this. This is an important piece of information coming up towards the end of the hour. Now, text or WhatsApp me 083 30 10 103. Be happy to put anything to our guests this evening. And as I said at the outset, fuel dominates the airwaves across the country as a result of the protests. But IFAC have some advice for you on how to deal with these cost surges. Philip O'Connor joins me. Philip, many thanks for taking my call this evening.
Thanks for having me on, MJ.
So Philip, as I said, look, we know there's fuel protests going on up and down the country at the moment, and farmers are very worried about these fuel increases given the time of year we're at, and the word from yourselves is take a little bit of action, I suppose, in advance of your planning what you're going to do over the next couple of months.
Yeah, I suppose that's where it's not rocket science what we're talking about here, and I'll explain a little bit more in a minute. And it's not massively good news either, if you know what I mean. I suppose when we think about fuel, I suppose for most primary producers, I'm thinking of livestock, the direct fuel cost isn't a huge cost on the farm, if you know what I mean, from the perspective, well, maybe the family car and stuff like any normal person going to school and works in bits and pieces. I suppose where it really hits into farming, the fuel is the knock-on cost of where fuel really hits them, which is fertiliser and contracting, if you know what I mean, as regards. So they're significant costs at any livestock farm, and obviously the tillage farms would have a significant diesel bill. So that's where the farmers are really going to see the cost increases, as in the cost of doing an acre of silage, baling a bale, and the cost of buying urea fertiliser. And then I think you had somebody on there last week, you were talking about it. I mean, urea has probably gone to what, about $8.30, $8.40 at the moment. So it's a significant price. And that's a direct relation to fuel costs.
I suppose 2026, Philip, getting off topic slightly off fuel, but 2026 has been a challenging year so far. It's a late spring, grass growth isn't where we wanted, weather not really playing ball, milk prices not where dairy farms would like them to be, beef prices definitively not where cattle farmers would like them to be, and now we have this shock of the fuel cost as well. It's a challenging start to the year.
It is, and like I was on your show there around January time, and we were talking about all these challenges, and we knew about the challenges about prices and milk and beef prices were high, but we knew there was. But one thing that we felt that was relatively stable was inflation, if you know what I mean, as regards we weren't seeing, and that's all changed in the last 3 weeks, if you know what I mean. So particularly with the fertiliser and stuff. So I suppose what we're really talking about in IFAC and mitigating it to a level is to know what your costs are going to be like. So we would have done a lot of budgets with farmers in the last couple of months. And there's a level of obviously going back, revisiting those budgets. So I suppose firstly we're looking at people, do you have the fertiliser? Have you bought the fertiliser? So in other words, have you got a cost coming? So if you have the fertiliser and you've paid for it, well, therefore you have it. So therefore the fertiliser impact is going to be lessened because you're not going to need fertiliser for a period of time if you haven't. Well, then you really need to sit down and do your fertiliser budget and know exactly how much you need, because this definitely isn't the year to be wasting fertiliser, for want of a better word, and to make sure you have the right amount of fertiliser. Your contractor bill, there's no sign of this diesel prices dropping anytime in the reasonable short term, if you know what I mean. And first cut silage is only around the corner. So I suppose we are going to have to budget. Farmers are going to have to think about that the contractor can carry that cost. So there is going to be an extra cost doing silage. So in other words, just plan for that and to know how much that cost will be and factor into your budget. And if cash, like any time, like any year, no different. Like if there was any year when there's a crisis or financial hit on the farm, do you have the funds for it? If you don't, where are you going to source it? Do you need to go to your bank? Do you need to extend your overdraft? Do you need to extend your creditors? Or do you need to dip into your cash reserves? But it's planning for it and knowing where you're going to be and how you're going to manage this price shock that's going on at the moment.
I think you make a good point there, Philip, in relation to contractors. I think this is a year definitively where farmers have to work with contractors and, expecting credit on a year like this, unless you have a conversation with them beforehand or whatever the case may be, but paying something up front and then maybe a payment plan quicker than you would normally pay if you did let it run a little bit longer, because really we need contractors, to work to the best of their ability during what's going to be one of the toughest years of business for them possibly ever.
It is. They have significant outlays that they have to pay, which is their diesel, their fuel costs and their wage costs. They're direct costs to them that they pay weekly, if you know what I mean. So yes, they are going to need a level of money coming in. They're hugely important, like the cost of machinery for farmers. So for the normal farmer, buying a lot of machinery to do their own work is getting less. It doesn't make as much financial sense anymore because of the cost of machinery. So it is cost effective to get the contractor, and that hasn't changed even with the prices. So yes, you're 100% right, MJ, working with your contractor and a good relationship with them, because you need them, if you know what I mean. They are very important to the industry for the sheer amount of silage they cut, the slurry they move, the tillage ground they sow and so forth. So it is important to work with them. And they're understanding, if you know what I mean. As you say, like you can put a payment plan. So if you know your contracting bill is going to be 20 grand, and you might say, right, so let's do five direct debits of 4 grand a month for the next 5 months or something like that. So you can manage this, and that means you looking at your own financials and seeing what you can afford and work with your contractor. Because you say we're all local businesses and we do need to work together.
We've spoken before, Philip, about income averaging and putting maybe 3 years together and seeing how you play out then over the course of that period of time. Isn't this a year now really where income averaging is going to come in over the last couple of years, a couple of strong years, especially last year was good. Now this year, we're taking that hit again. It's very hard to look at farming standalone years the way things are at the moment.
No, you do need to cash flow. You do need to budget and plan and keep cash reserves. It's more important than ever, and I suppose it's advice every SME nearly take on these days, that you do need to build a level of cash reserves, because I don't know, maybe I'm a bit cynical, but it seems to nearly every year there's some sort of a crisis coming, whether it's a weather event or a drought or hyperinflation or a price drop. So we do need to make our businesses a little bit more resilient and building in some cash reserves into them, that we can weather these storms, because they just seem to, and I mean storms metaphorically, do seem to be happening more often at the moment.
And from a farming perspective, Philip IFAC, obviously your customer base from the farming background, how are cash reserves looking over the last few years? When you're dealing with farmers' accounts, be them big farmers, small farmers, are farmers were they looking healthy at the start of this year, would you say, as an overview?
Yeah, in general, I would say the dairy sector was reasonably strong coming into this year. Now, there's always outliers, but in reasonable it was, because even though milk price dropped last year, they did come into, it was quite strong for most of the year. So a lot of dairy farms did have a reasonable level of cash reserves. The beef farmers did get a good bounce last year, in fairness to them. About time, I suppose, one would say, the suckler farms. But I suppose the issue the beef farmers were seeing is the high cost of buying back in. And the cost of calves, the cost of stores, cost of wheelings, if you know what I mean. So there's a high portion of that money gone back out onto stock, if you know what I mean. So that's it. There could be a level of tightness there. And we're seeing, in fairness, the banks supporting a little bit more on stocking loans, because I suppose if you had a stocking loan of, say, 50,000 to buy stock, well, you now need nearly double that to buy the same amount of stock, if you know what I mean. So I am advising beef farmers, if they use quite a lot of cash reserves to buy stock, go to your bank, and maybe extend your stock to cover that, to bring a bit of cash back into it. The tillage farmers, we spoke about this in January, MJ, the tillage farmers had a tough year last year. They had the last tough 2 years. So the cash reserves there in general weren't great, if you know what I mean, because they haven't had a good bounce of the ball, for want of a better word, in the last couple of years on returns in that sector.
Philip, I leave it there, and hopefully when I'm talking in a few months' time, we'll be talking about how the fuel crisis is over and things have gone back to normal. But in the interim, unfortunately, we're not going to be speaking about that. I'll say thanks for speaking to me this evening, Philip, here on Country Life.
Thank you very much, Benji. I appreciate being here.
Philip O'Connor there, Head of Farm Support at IFAC. And in relation to that and to fuel prices, looking at the Farmers Journal tomorrow and more, what would we say, challenging news. Analysts warns of more fuel price hikes to come. Energy analyst Daniel Evans warns the worst of the crisis is yet to hit. Up to 20% of global oil supply is currently restricted. Supply delays from the Middle East are masking deeper shortages. Europe could face significant diesel availability issues within weeks. This is according to an energy expert, Daniel Evans. So fingers crossed that isn't the case. But we will have a word as well on the protests from the farmers' perspective towards the end of the hour. Pat O'Brien from the ICMSA is going to have a word with us on that. But look, we'd all prefer to not be talking about high diesel prices. And I think the contractors, especially among us, just need to be cognizant of this. And as farmers, we need to be cognizant of them. And just contractors are going to have to be paid quite quickly this year in order to keep the ball rolling and to keep working through what is going to be a very tough couple of months. Now I'm going to go to a break, and after the break I'm going to be talking to Martin Merrick from the Irish Farmers Journal. Martin is from County Mayo, and as I said at the outset, how many times have you heard a farmer say, I'm building a shed but I'm going to do it without the grant, it's cheaper, less steel, less red tape. Well, Martin had a very interesting article in the Farmers Journal and online last week where he looks at that exact question. So let's see what the answer is in just a moment.
Country Life on Midlands 103.
With W.R. Shaw, family owned and serving the Midlands since 1982, we're Ireland's largest independent agri-dealer, specialising in New Holland tractors and parts. With over 40 years' experience, we provide top quality sales, service and support. Visit W.R. Shaw in Tullamore and Carlow or online at wrshaw.ie.
And you're very welcome back to Country Life here on Midlands 103. Now, TAMS and building is what we're going to speak about. And Martin Merrick from the Irish Farmers Journal joins me. Martin, you're writing about farm buildings week in, week out. Is there anything you don't know about this area at this stage?
There's plenty I don't know, MJ. I'm by no means an expert, but I try and impart what little information I have onto farmers as best we can anyway.
Well, as I said to listeners here at the outset, how many times have we heard farmers saying, I'm building a shed, I'm going to do it without the grant. I'm better off as a result of less steel and less red tape and whatnot. You looked at this, Martin, in detail in the paper last week. And in short, I suppose, we'll go through the figures in a moment, Martin, but is there any truth to that statement?
It's very hard to see, MJ. Like, as we said, I done an example last week. So your typical suckler shed with a slat area at the front, creep at the back, and maybe a crush in the creep area, you're talking around the 24 to 26,000 euro per bay. So we say your 4-bay shed fit to hold 30 to 32 suckler cows, you're talking around 100 grand plus that. Now, that shed is probably at a reference cost of 85,000 MJ. Like, the reference costs are still probably not in line, and they're probably going to go more out of kilter because we're seeing an increase in concrete costs because of fuel and the carbon tax coming on and that. So it's going up by 10 or 20 euro a metre again. But getting back to it, that shed is costing about 100,000 euro to do to TAM spec. And I done the sums in it then. So if you're getting a 6% grant on the tank, with the tank costing around 25 grand, and 40% on the rest, you're getting about 39,000 euro back in grant aid on the shed. And you get your VAT back after that. Now, my argument would be is that it's very hard to complete that 4-bay shed for 61,000 euro if you didn't go down the line of going with the grant. If you just went off your own bat, as so many farmers say is a better option, very hard to do that shed for 61,000 without seriously compromising something, be it the finish of the shed or the longevity of it. You know, you're going to be using lighter RSJs, you're not going to be using sufficient steel in the tank, in my eyes, to get that shed complete for 61,000. the big thing is, as you probably know as well, is regarding planning and the time frame with TAMs and everything like that. And that's quite often why a lot of farmers out there will just go it alone and not bother with the grant, because if a farmer asks me how long is it going to take me between planning and getting my green light from TAMs, you're talking probably 9 to 12 months in reality, MJ. Like that's the timeline it is. So if you are looking to get a shed for winter 2026, forget about it now. But it's a shed for 2027 that you need to be looking at these times and getting your planning application in for that.
Right, we'll chat about planning in one moment, Martin. But just back on those figures there on the shed that it will cost you 100,000 plus VAT, but you'll get the grant on roughly about 85. And I think the interesting figure there is, I know there's a higher grant for the tank than the structure, but roughly we're talking a 39% grant, essentially, if you're 40%, if you will, of it. So we're being told 60 for one, 40 for the other. It's kind of somewhat, no, I wouldn't say it's in the middle, but it's on the lower end of that. But it's still a sizable grant. You know, there's not many other areas where you'll go and someone will give you X amount of money to build something on your holding. And I suppose we shouldn't fall short of that. Yes, we'd like it to be higher and to be closer to the percentages the departments say, but it's still it's not too bad, you know.
No, it's not. Like, and in fairness, it's something that I've written about in the journal quite often in the past. And in September 2025, we did see some decent increases. In particular, we say the likes of calf sheds for dairy calf to beef farmers, that they rose by 20%. Sheep sheds rose by 20%. I think the slatted area rose by 10% for slatted beef sheds. One of the more disappointing elements of it was, MJ, the tanks. If you actually done up the sums on the tanks, they only rose by about 3%, which was quite disappointing, because concrete cost is probably the main driver of the increase in price in farm buildings in the last couple of years. And we've seen that increase year on year for various reasons, taxes and everything else that comes with it. And they only rose by 3%. So that's kind of the bit of the kicker there. But as you rightly said, MJ, like €100,000 shed, you're getting 39,000 back. It's hard to refuse it at the same time. My argument is you'll do very well to build that shed for the 60 or 61,000.
Now we're talking about planning, Martin. So let's talk about firstly the farmer who has decided to build a shed without TAMs. So does he or she need planning permission? Can they just build whatever they want on their holding or on their yard, or is there a rule they need to be wary of?
No, it's still very much the case. And as we said, that's quite often the reason that farmers don't go down the TAMS route, MJ, because they don't want to bother with applying for planning. But for every structure within your yard, permanent structure, you either need a letter of exemption from the council, which will depend on various things, the size and proximity to the road and things like that, or you need the full plan permission. So you need one of the two, MJ, before you go doing anything at all. In my mind, it's very foolish of a farmer to just go it alone and not to bother for planning, because, as we rightly said there, the cost of construction at the minute, if you were to go and build a shed without plan permission, and it was thereafter found out that you'd done it, you'd be asked to remove that. There is quite a strong possibility you could apply for retention, but there's also the strong possibility that you'd have to remove that building and at your own cost. So I think it's very foolish for any farmer not to go down the planning route. And when you've gone down the planning route, I think you should go for the TAMS 8. Now, we talked about the letter of exemption there as well, and that's something as well that I highlighted last week, in that they've increased the area in what qualifies for an exemption on planning. It's still very much the same process as applying for plan permission. The big bonus to it is that no one can object to it. If you qualify for this exemption, a member of the public or a member or someone from 100 miles down the road that sees your plan permission in Mayo or Westmeath or Offaly or wherever it might be, they can't put in an objection to it. So that's the big driver of that and the big bonus of it.
Yeah, and we did have issue where people were putting in these objections from all over the country in relation to agri-developments. I heard many a story in relation to that. So that's a benefit. Just this letter of exemption then, Martin, there's a couple of tick the boxes for this, I suppose. And if your farmyard is relatively close to the public road. So we see lots of yards, my own included actually, it's next to the road. Lots of times that's where new buildings are built due to ease of access and whatnot. It has to be certain distance. A new shed has to be a certain distance from the road and has to be a certain size. Can you just explain that for us, please?
Yeah, so a couple of the main points with this exemption, MJ, really is it has to be 10 metres away from the public road, which isn't an awful distance either, it's about 30 foot. Like, you know, if you're locating it at the bottom of the yard of that, you probably tick the box there. But probably a more important one to tick is that it has to be 100 metres or greater from any dwelling house other than your own. Now, there is the option there that if you get written permission from a person the new development is going to be closer than 100 metres, if you get written permission from them to say, I'm okay with this is fine, then that's all right. Thereafter, MJ, it depends on the size of the project in mind, and it depends on the size of other buildings within the yard. So in a previous iteration of this, it would have been 200 metres squared of a size that you could build without full plan permission, but now that's increased up to 300 square metres. So it's the size of the shed. We were talking there about that 4-bay suckler shed. You'd probably extend out to a 5-bay suckler shed with a creep at the back of it. So it's quite a nice size development. What will catch a lot of people is that the aggregate area within the yard has to be below 450 metres squared. So in plain language, the size of the new development and the size of the existing development within the yard has to be under 450 metres squared. So I gave an example there of someone that wants to build a 250 metre squared calf shed within their yard. So the 250 square metres is below your 300 square metre threshold. That's fine. But within that yard as well, they also had a 150 metre squared sheep house and a 200 metre squared cattle house. So when you added all those three buildings together, the new calf shed, the existing sheep shed and silage shed, it came to 600 metres squared. In that case, that person wasn't eligible for an exemption on their planning, and they would have to go for full plan permission. And any other issues that would have been in the past, we say farmers that are their land is in SAC or SPA or such, they will also have to go for full plan permission. It's not, as we say, a green light to go and do whatever you want. It's much the same process, MJ, as applying for your full plan permission. You still have to get your drawings done and such. But as I said, the real benefit of this is that Joe Blogs cannot object to this once you tick the boxes that you're eligible for the exemption.
Yeah, when I'm listening to you go through those figures, Martin, it sounds that the exempted one is kind of for possibly maybe smaller yards or maybe someone who's getting up and running as opposed to an established larger scale farmer, like they're going to go over that shed space pretty quickly, I would imagine. So I'm guessing that's who it's for, to get people off the ground without too much hassle or red tape.
Yeah, that's exactly, MJ. And I had a farmer contact me there a couple of months back as well that was looking to build a shed on an out farm that they were doing up a succession plan, and one of their children was getting the home yard, but they wanted to set up a shed on an out block. And in this case, this worked really well for this farmer because there was no development there at all, and they could build a 4 or 5 bay suckler shed for their son or daughter that was coming on. And in an instance like that, it works really well, this planning exemption.
Just to finish, Martin, we're talking about the cost of doing business this year, and obviously the fuel crisis and fertiliser and whatnot is going to play into all of these decisions. But maybe at the outset of the year or last year, farmers might have been planning developments for this year. From your research and your writings on a weekly basis, is there much happening in relation to farm buildings at the moment in 2026?
We saw a huge interest in 2025 on the back of strong prices both in the beef and the dairy sector. The dairy sector would drive most of the developments. When we look at the plan permission figures, it's generally concentrated in the south. We saw a marked increase last year, MJ, of plan permissions granted, which was good to see. It showed that farmers had interest in developing their farms, and it also showed that those plan permissions were being granted as well. I would, by all accounts, suggest that won't continue this year. As I said, concrete costs are gone by 10 to 20 euro a metre squared up. Mix has come down. A lot of farmers will be simply nailing the checkbook to the floor and trying to spend as little as possible this year just to get them through, and it'll be only a matter of doing what needs to be done this year. So I would see a marked decrease in planning and in developments this year, MJ, definitely.
Ready mix, Martin, I know this crisis is going to have an effect again on it as a result of what's going on, but we would have thought before it occurred that it had to have reached pretty much a ceiling. Like, the rise in cost of ready mix in the last 3 to 4 years has been exponential, and if it goes up much more, it will start becoming out of reach of farmers, possibly other than very large scale dairy farmers.
Yeah, but as we said there, MJ, like, quite a lot of these larger scale dairy farmers are feeling the pinch as much as anyone. When we talk about the dry stock sector, we're probably, your suckler farmer that's selling their weanlings that has the same cost year on year, that has seen their weanling price increase from anywhere to 700 to 1,000 euro per weanling. They're probably looking to spend money. Of course, the fertilizer and diesel prices are going to take some of that out of their pocket this year. But yeah, if it gets much higher, MJ, like you would imagine it reached the ceiling. At the moment, it's trading from 150 to 165 euro a square metre in the main. Like, it's getting to be very, very expensive. It wasn't so long ago that it was under 90 euro a square metre, like, and it was well within reach for a lot of people, but we're looking at it approaching double very quickly here, unfortunately.
Yeah, on that we will let you go, Martin. I have to say, very interesting chat there, and great to just hear the figures in relation to building from the man in the know. You're writing about it every week, and it's great to get you on to have a chat. So thanks for joining us here on the programme, Martin, and we'll speak to you again on the show.
Thanks very much, MJ.
Martin Merrick there from the Irish Farmers Journal, and lots of information there, I know, but I suppose a takeaway from it, if you're planning some sort of a building, and I know this year you more than likely won't be, but possibly you might have had a plan from last year and it was something that you'd budgeted for, that letter of exemption is an interesting one. It's for smaller farmyards basically, and if your shed is under a certain size, then you don't need full planning permission, and you can go to your council. You still need your drawings and whatnot, but you can get a letter of exemption from them and crack on with it. And obviously, look, you need somebody to aid you on that. You need a planner, and you need someone to help you submit it and whatnot, and you need the drawings done up on CAD, but it may tie into your proposed building. And also, I suppose if you hear that going forward, then I'm going to build a shed, but I'm not going to do it with the grant. We had the figure there, if your shed is going to cost 100,000 euro ex VAT, you're basically looking at the moment of a grant of 39,000 euro. So say 40,000 euro. So it's a 40% grant really. And Martin's point was very hard to build that shed to a good standard for the difference, that difference between 140, which is 60,000. So his answer is no, really. You're not going to do it cheaper than the grant. Now, coming up after the break, we're going to be talking about growing grass for silage in an organic system, so without fertiliser, and this could be the way lots of smaller farmers are aiming to grow grass this year, just given the cost of fertiliser. So we're going to hear about it from Laois lady Marianne Mulhall in just a moment.
Country Life on Midlands 103.
Brought to you by W.R. Shaw, where New Holland isn't just a brand, it's our passion. For over 40 years, we've been Ireland's trusted name for New Holland tractors, parts and farm machinery. Whether you need new, used or ex-hire tractors, we've got you covered. wrshaw.ie.
And you're welcome back to Country Life here on Midlands 103. Now, organics is what we're speaking about for the next few moments, and we have Marianne Mulhall on the line. Marianne, many thanks for taking my call this evening.
Good evening, MJ. Thank you.
You're more than welcome, Marianne. Interesting farm walk in Enfield next week. It's about grass silage on organic farms. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. But first, organics. Obviously, look, a lot of people gone into organics over the last number of years. People applied in 2025. Did many people get into the scheme now? Have we many new organic farmers from 1 January 2026?
So a good bit more limited than we've seen in the last 3 or 4 years. So approximately about 270 farmers were accepted in. However, the budget was a lot smaller from the Department of Agriculture, and they had flagged that, I suppose. So it kind of reflected maybe the applications that were going in. They had, as I said, flagged that they were going to prioritise tillage sector, dairy and the horticulture. So there wasn't as many of the dry stock beef and sheep farmers put in for it this time around. But because I suppose they kind of knew that they weren't going to get priority. So it is a good bit back, but look at hopefully maybe next year's budget might open up a little bit again and allow some more in, because there still is interest out there for conversion, you know.
Yeah, well, my point here at the start of the programme was you could have more people interested than they may not be getting the payments, but with the cost of fertiliser the way it is at the moment and the cost of inputs, growing grass and growing quality grass without fertiliser is going to be something that every farmer is going to be interested in it, and that's exactly what you're going to be talking about next Tuesday, 14th of April. It's in Enfield in County Meath, and it's talking about making quality silage organically. It is the one thing I would hear farmers say over the years, that they may have interest in organics, but how do you grow grass without fertiliser? This is what you will hear. I'm sure you've heard it many a time as well, Marianne. And that's the overarching question. And it can be done, and that's what you're going to be talking about here on the day.
Yeah, and we just really like, I suppose, to open it up to it. This is not just a walk for organic farmers, because non-organic farmers can learn so much from how to grow grass and how to make good quality silage with no fertiliser, or certainly by pulling back on their own fertiliser from a cost perspective alone, you know, apart from the environmental and soil benefits of reducing back on fertiliser. But just to answer your question, I suppose, in the organic systems, from a grazing point of view, we very much are dependent on white clover with our grasses. And I suppose multi-species swards have become very important as well in the organics from a grazing point of view. The multi-species can be cut as silage as well. So they make good silage as well. From the silage point of view, it would, for any farm that is reasonably well stocked and needs a good proportion of silage for their winter, we would look at red clover silage is the answer to making good quality, very good quality silage and making lots of it. And just, I suppose, the red clover silage with zero nitrogen fertiliser is able to yield the equivalent of, 15 tonnes of dry matter to the hectare, which is exceptional. And I suppose a lot of farmers would find that hard to believe if you're not putting a fertiliser or nitrogen onto it. How is it doing it? But that's what red clover can do in its own right. And when you're not spreading nitrogen onto it, it takes off, I suppose, and it does what it does best with nature, and it is able to do that. And I suppose as well as that, then, like, having enough silage is one thing, but having good quality is really important, and it's important for all farmers, but I suppose it is a little bit more important for the organic farmer because the price of organic feed is quite expensive. So the better quality silage you can make, the less need you have to buy in this expensive feed. And that's just, I suppose it's all about, you said about the inputs and the costs. So whether it's feed or whether it's fertiliser, by reducing those inputs, it leaves more money in the farmer's pocket. And I suppose that's what we really want to give that advice and help farmers do that.
The name of the game, Marianne. The farmer is Niall Slattery in Lecaro, Enfield, County Meath. What's the system on this farm?
So Niall is the suckler to store system, but 27 to 30 cows he's calving down there every year. So he's just kind of a very good farm in terms, he's a fourth year organic, so he's new enough into it. But I suppose what I was struck by is he has great paddock grazing going on, moving them every 24 hours. Grass is really important, to get the most out of it. Very good white clover in all the grazing paddocks, and is making red clover silage as well. But I suppose what struck me looking at his ICBF reports, he has a super compact calving with 6 weeks. It's all AI. Kind of, I suppose he focuses on easy calving to get that done pretty quick. He's working off farm, and his two sons are kind of very interested as well. They're young. It's lovely to see young farmers so interested as well. But they're all working off farm, so I suppose that is important, that it's compact. Technology is good, using pasture base, measuring grass. They have the cow manager tags for heat detection, fertility detection, and just everything, calving down heifers at 2 years of age. Their calving interval is 366 days, so you can't get much better than that. And then their silage results from this winter gone by, really good DMD, well up in the mid-70s. The red clover protein was 18%. The normal grass silage was in and around 13.5%, I think, if I remember correctly. But that's really important, because that's what's given, I suppose, the good herd performance, having good silage into those animals, having enough milk, meeting the target there, that their replacement heifers are able to, they're at the right weight for AI to calve down at 2 years of age, So just meeting all the targets, I suppose, that all beef farmers should be aiming towards.
Yeah, I think a lot could be garnered from that event for farmers across the board. As you say, you don't have to be organic there. A lot of boxes being ticked. And it is Tuesday, 14th of April, next Tuesday, 2:30.
Next Tuesday, yeah.
Yeah, 2:30 p.m. Anything else to add? Am I missing anything?
Well, I'll maybe give the air code.
Yeah.
So it's A83NP77. So that's A83NP77.
Cool. I'll give that a call out at the end, and the details are available on the Teagasc website as well.
Yeah.
Many thanks for joining me this evening, Marianne. We'll talk to you again in the programme.
Thank you, MJ.
Marianne Mulhall there from Teagasc, and doesn't sound like that man is doing too much wrong. It's Niall Slattery in Enfield, great calving interval there, 6-week period, 27 to 30 cows, ICBF, AI, and grown enough silage for his enterprise, which organically can be challenging. So good to see it. And that red clover silage, I suppose, is the one a lot of organic farmers go to. There is a P and K requirement on that, of course, and that is where you have to go down with your slurry and your dung, so you don't get all that silage for nothing. But it is where people bolster up their winter reserves. There's no question about that. Now, coming up after the break, we're going to be talking to Pat O'Brien from the ICMSA about whether or not you need to do a training course if you have a teleporter on your farm. And if you do, you're not going to like how long the training course is for, so stay tuned. We're going to talk about it in just a moment.
Country Life on Midlands 103.
With W.R. Shaw. Looking for the best in farm machinery? We've been supplying top quality New Holland tractors and parts and providing service since 1982. Our expert team is here to keep your farm running smoothly, with branches in Tullamore and Carlow. Visit wrshaw.ie today.
And you're welcome back to Country Life here in Midlands 103. Now, the last part of this evening's programme, and Pat O'Brien from the ICMSA from Tullamore here joins me. Pat, many thanks for taking my call this evening.
You're more than welcome, MJ.
Pat, we're going to more than welcome, Pat. And you're going to be giving us information that farmers may not want to hear now in a few moments about whether they have to go and do a training course in relation to handling a telescopic or a telehandler on their farm. But just a word, Pat. Look, Tullamore was blocked up today, as was lots of the country in relation to these fuel protests. A word on them from the ICMSA's viewpoint, please.
Yeah, well, look, we're not officially supporting them, but we do understand why they're doing it. We're not involved in it, but we're 100% behind them, and it's understandable why people feel they have no other choice but to go out and protest. These people would much rather be out in their fields, out in the road, delivering their loads. They'd rather be anywhere else, only standing on the side of a road, and I think today didn't help them. Like the press, the statement from the Taoiseach hasn't helped things. I think it has infuriated them more. And look, I'm not here to speak on behalf of them. To have people far more capable of speaking. Local man James Gagan spoke very well on the national airwaves today, and fair play to him. And look, I hope to reap the rewards of their efforts.
And moving on, Pat, to what we're speaking about now, and this is if you have a telescopic. There's lots of different words for these machines, but let's call it a telescopic going forward. If you have one on your farm tell us, what do you need to be cognizant of?
Since September, there has been a code of practice introduced where you need to have 5 days training done, 32 and a half hours at a rough cost of €1,000. The majority of farmers in the country are completely unaware of it. There was a piece in the Farmers Journal about it last weekend, or last Thursday. And if you are operating stacking bales or lifting pallets, you have to have this course done. If you're operating a shear grab, loading silage, using a bucket, lifting clay or dung or whatever, you don't need it done. So it's not clear cut, and people are going to fall between the two stools. They may think they're all right operating, and they may get caught out. So it's very technical.
I suppose my question then, Pat, is what happens if you don't have it done, and maybe is it a HSA inspector walks into the yard and sees you operating one of these? Well,
that's the least of your worries. If the HSA inspector comes in, he'll give you a warning, and he'll tell you to go and do your course and park up your telehandler until you have the course done. But if you're unfortunate enough to have an accident, have a mishap, you're unloading, the truck comes into the yard with a pallet or something, and it slips off the pallet and hits the driver of the truck, you find yourself in court, and the judge looks down and he says, well, Pat, you didn't think you needed any training. And the HSA recommends 5 days training. He could order you to pay the victim $500,000.
And I suppose,
and then you're in trouble.
Yes, and I suppose, Pat, this is, unfortunately, we do have to think of worst case scenarios at times. Like, it is fine to go and do these things and to kind of say, look, it'll be fine, it's no big deal and whatnot. But it is when something occurs that the proverbial, we know what it is, hits the fan.
Hits the fan, yeah.
And that's where the issue is. So the advice then, Pat, for if farmers are listening now and they have a telescopic in the yard, the advice is to look into one of these courses and see about getting it done, I'm presuming. I know there's a cost and you're calling for maybe a little bit of financial assistance or whatnot on that, but they're going to have to be done.
That can't be given, MJ, because this was brought in last September, so there's no run-in period, so the government can't assist. Even if they were willing, they can't assist because it's in operation already and it's compulsory. We ourselves feel that it's too draconian. It's going from zero training to 5 days. That's the same as somebody operating a telescopic handler on a building site or in a busy merchant's yard. And we felt if there was 1 day's training, it's a hell of a lot more than there is there now. And the person's assessed. Look, at some people, if they had 5 weeks training, they shouldn't be put on one of these machines.
Yeah.
But common sense and a little bit of training would be a hell of a lot further on than where we are at the moment. If you go to climb Mount Everest, you don't start 3/4 ways up. You start at the bottom. And that's where we think the training should start.
Yeah, 5 days does seem, it seems a lot, Pat.
Yeah, look, we put out a press release in Agriland last week, and there was a victim of an accident came forward, and actually him coming forward would probably do more than any course. But he said where he was in an accident, he was out fencing cattle in the field and the teleporter ran into him. But unless he was going out with a pallet of stakes or a pallet of blocks to do that fencing, he wouldn't need to have the course done. So it wouldn't have covered him. You know, like unless you're lifting what they call a unit load, which is a bale of silage, a pallet of whatever material, you don't need to do it. If you're loading loose material, you don't need to do it. And that's where the really tricky bit comes, because I can ask a neighbour to come in and do something with the bucket. Somebody comes in making a delivery, something on a pallet, he sticks on the pallet forks and something falls off. I'm in trouble, he's in trouble, and the lorry driver's the victim. So everybody's in hot water.
Will there be any change in this, Pat, do you feel? Is it going to stay at the 5 days, or is there a chance that there might be maybe an intermediary course brought in for agri-use or whatnot?
I honestly don't know. At the moment, there is no designated course for agri-use. they're saying that trainers will have to adapt the courses there for construction to the agri sector. So it's really, they brought in the course. There's no training. Nobody knew it was in, and it's all a bit higgledy-piggledy. The intentions are good, and I know there's people the length and breadth of the country that may know somebody that was involved in an accident, and I'm not trying to make little of that. But what I'm saying is that if they started at the beginning instead of near the top of the mountain, they would be better off.
Well, Pat, what I'll say is thanks for shedding some light on the subject for us. I'm just out of time, so I'm going to have to say good evening to you. We'll be back talking about this again, and we'll say thanks for joining me on the programme this evening, Pat.
Thank you, MJ.
Pat O'Brien from the ICMSA. So, look, really important information there. If you have a telehandler in your yard, I suppose, go and look into it. Are you using it for those different types of loads, those unit loads, or are you using it for the other materials? Does that safety course apply to you? Depends. It may and it may not. But that's the information there from the ICMSA. I would agree with Pat that 5 days seems a little ridiculous when it's currently, it was 0 back before last September. A 1 or a 1.5 day course would probably equip you for the use around an agri yard. And that is it for this evening's programme. I'd like to thank all my guests this evening. Marianne Mulhall from Teagasc about that farm walk that's taking place next week. It's in Enfield. If you pop onto the Teagasc website, you'll get the details of it. Also, at the start of the hour, we were speaking to Martin Merrick from the Farmers Journal. He was giving us all the details on applying for TAMS grants and whether or not you need to, depending on the size of the structure. Would you save money if you didn't get the grant and you built a shed anyway? He gave all the details on that. And also Philip O'Connor there from IFAC spoke to us earlier on in the hour. Now, that is it for the programme, and I will be back with you next Wednesday evening, as always, 7 p.m. We'll be repeated on Sunday morning at 7 a.m. through to 8 a.m. You can also get us wherever you get your podcasts. If you type in MJ space Clery, Clery, we will pop up. We're on YouTube as well, and we're on all the other platforms. So we usually go out on Friday on those, and you can listen at your leisure. We will be speaking to you in 7 days' time. Again, thank you all for listening over the course of the last hour, and good evening.